Welcome to the Bad Boss Brief. I am Stephanie Perillo.
And I'm Eugene S. Robinson.
And we are at episode 81, which we are calling You Asked For It. So,
well, for me, that always goes back to KISS. You asked for it, you got it. KISS. Or you asked for the best, you got it. KISS.
So what we mean is that we're today going to be answering questions that you sent in to us. And again, always appreciate when you all send questions. And so we've got a couple. We're going to cover as many as we can. Again, WTF@badbossbrief.com. Send us some more for future ideas. And we'll start with this one. So this is a listener who wrote in and said, what advice would you give someone who has worked in nonprofits, primarily public health and state government, that is trying to find a job? Right. So his jobs have been cut. Mm-hmm. He has, because of Trump and the Trump administration. He says, I'm 43, live in the Midwest, and only have a BA in history. I get interviews, but I keep getting kindly rejected for these jobs, which I should be impossibly overqualified for compared to anyone else applying. I would be very appreciative of any advice, assistance, or anecdotes for a midlife Midwestern man. What do you think, Eugene?
Oh, that's great. Yeah, because I've got a daughter who was working for, a health and human services kind of deal, like social work, and she was just laid off this week because, surprise, this is not a financial priority in a Trump administration. Taking care of your poor, unwashed indigents, not something he cares about. So the budgets are going to be tight in that space where you are. And if it's only something you're doing to make money, I would gather that increasingly we're going to have to be aggressive about the ways in which we make money. Because, for example, in the Bay Area, which I escaped from and no longer live, they laid off 80,000 people at Meta. And I thought that was a mistake at first. I thought, well, maybe they meant 8,000. No, I was right the first time. And 80,000 is a huge number. Some would say that if you can lay off 80,000 people without damaging your business, those people may not have needed to have jobs in the first place. But I disagree. And I think that to recession-proof, even the hardcore MAGA people I know believe that the market's going to crash by the end of the year. Of course, they believe it is the establishment out to get Trump that's going to cause it to happen. But they believe that by the end of the year, the market's going to crash. And I strongly suggest, and I kept this in my back pocket through periods of unemployment, all of the service things that I knew how to do, hanging sheetrock, painting houses, moving furniture, construction, were things that easy. I get out at 5. I don't have anybody emailing me or calling me afterward. I get cash on hand, and you can pay your taxes anywhere you like from that. And it's clean and respectable work. You're 43. You got lots of gas in the tank, and when it comes back to getting a work job in your field, to explain your absence, you chalk it up to you had a vision quest. You went traveling. You didn't go to prison. You don't want to say that, but that you spent some time. You had a sabbatical, and that you were, back. And you should never stop looking for a job. So that should have happened throughout the layoff and up to now, this moment this very moment in time. So that's what I would do. I mean, you can't. I don't care if it's an ego thing and you don't want to tell your family that, I'm painting houses again, or I'm moving because people will pay for these things to buoy their self-esteem and their feeling. I mean, if you can't do anything, paint your house. So, and you can undercut, I'm quite sure you could probably undercut the people who do it, who have been doing it professionally. So that's what I would do. It's either that or robbing liquor stores. No, that's a joke.
No robbing liquor stores.
No robbing liquor stores.
Well, so. What I was thinking about is I think there's two pieces to having unemployment. First of all, I'm guessing if this man has been working in public health, he is not motivated primarily by finances, right? Mm-hmm. So that's just a guess. And I think these are the people where my heart really breaks, right? Who are working in social services, who are working in marginalized communities, education, who have lost their jobs, right? So they're there for the right reasons. And we as a, country are not supporting them or the people that they were supporting. So I just want to name that. But I think there's two pieces. I think there's an emotional piece in being laid off. Like, get out of the house, try to spend a certain amount of hours every day looking for work, get exercise, move your body, be careful about the drugs and alcohol, and, just try to be around other people, even if it's just going to a farmer's market and like be outside. So that's the one thing you need to pay attention to your emotional well-being, because for a lot of people, they look for work for a really long time and it's exhausting and dealing with the rejection. The second thing is you talk about not getting jobs that you are overqualified for when you interview. And I think it's really important that we get advice and feedback from someone who will tell us the truth about all aspects of our process, right? So if an interview is a particular problem for someone, what I will suggest is do a mock interview with another person, right? So you could hire a coach or an advisor to do this with you. You could do it with a friend who has the wherewithal to tell you what, you need to know. But there can be small things or large things that we do in interviews that we're not aware of, right? Do you talk too quickly? Do you talk not enough? A lot of people feel like they shouldn't kind of toot their own horn. And so they don't really articulate the value that they have provided in a particular way. And so there's so many things where you could trip up in an interview situation. And I'm guessing if you're getting to an interview, your resume is okay, how you're reaching out, but you ideally, if you are unemployed and have been for a while, you want to have somebody who knows what they're doing, tell you the truth about every aspect. Like you don't want to be losing a job because you have terrible body odor and you are not aware of it, right? I mean, that's an extreme example, but there are things that we just don't see about ourselves. And you want to make sure that you've covered that. And then again, to, Eugene's point, I remember being broke and I did get a job painting houses. That's what I did because I'm like, I can hold a paintbrush and people are going to pay good money for this. And, I went to work for a friend's mother-in-law who was a contractor and was like, okay, go paint these places. And, I think recognizing what is a job that people will pay that I have the physical capacity to do, understanding that it's an interim, situation. And then and then go do that. But again, I just want to name, it's very challenging to be looking for work, managing the emotions of looking for work, trying to make your money go as far as possible and working a side job. So we're intentional and acknowledging that it's a heavy lift, but, might help.
Yeah. And the numbers, I mean, somebody's going to be working. That means there's going to be some jobs available. So it's just, you've got to endure better, longer, harder, faster than the system that's allied against you. But one thing that kind of Stephanie touched on, and I've got personal experience with, you wouldn't think. I've made my living. I've been getting paid for my writing since I was 14 years old. So putting together a resume should be the easiest part of it. And finally, at one point, I decided, you know what? I'm going to splurge. I'm going to pay somebody else $200, $300, one of these resume companies, to see what they could do for me. And they asked a question that I thought was incredible. And they go, "What are you hoping to achieve with this resume?" And it was assumed that we both were speaking the same language, and we were talking about, well, I'm hoping to achieve employment. But what would you like this resume to do? And I said, well, in a very specific way, I would like to conceal how old I am. This resume. And I hate to say it, but they turned in 2 pages that were well worth the $300 I paid, and that I never in a million years would have come up with myself. And this never would have done it. I would never have sold myself this way. I would never have. And I've seen examples, and I've studied. I've been in a hiring position, seen lots of resumes, lots of different formats, but it was really well worth the money. You could say, how many jobs did I get off of that? Well, it doesn't. That's not the point. I got one, so that was enough. But it was a worthwhile expenditure. It was a gamble, I think, that paid off. And so what Stephanie was saying is, get help. There's help out there. In my case, I had to pay for it, which is kind of only really the help I respect. But it was worthwhile.
Well, but I will also add a caveat to that, which is a lot of people, when they are unemployed, are told or think, I'm going to go to work for myself. And I
Mm.
say this as a person who has worked for herself for a dozen
Yeah.
years and, done pretty well for most of that time. It is a very challenging enterprise, and it takes a while before you start seeing money.
Yeah.
And so, if that is a viable career shift for you, if you are fortunate enough to have a year's worth of savings in the bank and a spouse who has employer provided healthcare, yeah. But
Mhm.
my concern is there's a lot of people who are told, well, I really enjoy photography. I'm going to become a photographer. That
Yeah.
that may be a legitimate dream to pursue, but do not underestimate how much time it's going to take for you to make money if you even do. And also, your experience, Eugene, of paying someone a couple $100 to redo your resume and having
Mhm.
good luck with that. As I've mentioned before, paid some people to help me with like PR and publicity for my book, which came out actually a year ago
Mhm.
this month. And I might as well have set the money on fire in my backyard for all the value I got out of it. And so
Yeah.
there are a lot of people who are, looking to scam you by saying, hey, pay me $5,000 and I'll teach you to have, this, that, or the next thing. And, and this idea that is really prevalent that like, if you can get a bunch of followers on social media,
Yeah. Yeah.
that'll
That's a
be a
good.
job. And,
Yeah. Yeah.
unless you're taking your clothes off, that's really not a very
Yeah.
good reason. And you have to be taking your clothes off in a very specific category in order
Right.
to make money with that. And so I think you also need to have a little bit of buyer beware
Yeah.
because, I've been unemployed and looking for work, you are vulnerable. And there
Mhm.
are people who prey on, those people who are looking for work. And so just be careful. Hire people who are being realistic. Make sure that you're being realistic. And again, I mean, this is very self-serving, but I do have to say, I wrote a book called The Saint and the Drunk about making decisions about your career. And there's some
Yeah.
exercises in there that I think could be really helpful, especially for people who are considering, do I have to leave the career that I've had for whatever reason and find something else to do? How do I do that without just sort of
Mm.
throwing darts at, the wall? And I have
Yeah.
a process in my book for that.
Chuck Dukowski, formerly of Black Flag and used to be at SST Records, said something when we had a record out on SST Records, my old band, and said something that I thought. He said, "Well, what do you want to do about public relations, PR?" I said, "Well," and he goes, "Listen, let me just interrupt. And if the person approaches you about doing PR, they are to be avoided. They're
Mm,
selling you something, right? Figure out who the best is, talk to your friends and see who they like, and then you approach them. These are the people that you can trust. And so
right.
I've latched onto that over the years. It's like anybody approaching me for stuff, right? The first thing I say is it free? And if it's not free, it's okay. I'll look at it on my own. Thank you.
Yeah,
You know?
exactly. All right. So
Yeah.
the second question is from a commenter who was reading my Substack a couple of weeks ago. And usually we don't double dip. We both have Substacks. We both have other, you have
No,
other podcasts. But I thought this was a good one for a double dip because the Substack that I wrote was called No More Semaphore. And I was talking
mhm.
about the frustration at work of people who ask you things without asking. And one of the commenters who watches this show said that would be a great thing for you and Eugene to talk about. And I think he probably wanted your opinion on this. But
Mhm.
the just to clarify, semaphore is the language where the way of communicating where you use flags in different configurations, right? And that would be how ships would communicate with each other before there was the advent of technology that allowed you to talk to them directly.
Yes.
And this notion of signaling your needs instead of actually asking for them, we see all the time, right? So you think of someone in a domestic situation who says, I'm thirsty, as their partner walks into the kitchen, as opposed to, hey, can you bring me a glass of water? Right.
Right.
And there's lots and lots of ways in which this happens at work, from bad bosses or, challenging employees, and for a variety of reasons. But, it could be something like, I'm busy, as opposed to, I need help with this. Can you take this project off my plate?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And
I,
people do it for a variety of reasons. But what do you
right.
do when you're faced with a non-ask?
Well, I'm as diagnosed by my children. on the spectrum. So, like I was smiling when you were talking about, because I remember was remembering almost getting stabbed by an ex girlfriend before we were boyfriend and girlfriend, because she was telling me, "I like you." I'd be like, "Yeah, I like you too." She was like, "No, no, I like you." I go, "And I like you." I just I wasn't getting it. And she actually, at one point, was so frustrated. She's walking around her apartment with scissors with this intense look on her face. And I was like, okay, now I know something's going on. Yeah, you know, and I said, "What's going on? You need to relax." I felt my spider sense was tingling. So in a work situation, I've done very poorly with non-ask. Hey, you got, and people, at one point, they a job that I ended up getting, they called one of my references, the guy who had been managing editor of New Times, which published the Village Voice and the LA Weekly and so on. And they said, "What kind of management style works best with you, Gene?" And he thought for a second. He goes, "Not for too long," but he goes, "A creative one." It's mostly because I'm fully engaged in doing what has to be done. But you got to tell me, I'm not the guessing guy. I'm not a mind. I'm not Kreskin. I can't. I'm not picking up on these cues. So typically, when faced with non-ask ask, I just skate right through them until somebody says, "I need you to do this for me right now." And I go, "Oh, okay, cool, sure." Yeah, I mean, I had that unfortunate incident at Corporate Computing Magazine where the boss had asked me to do something for her. And I said, "Well, I'll do it when I finish this thing." And she walked back to her office, grabbed the phone book, walked back over, and slammed it down on my hands, which were on the keyboard, and said, "Do it now." I clearly didn't get that she needed it done now, but she communicated really badly, and that got a resultant bad response from me as well.
Yeah,
So
that would
we never worked together after that.
yes,
So
that would be a bad boss gold star on that one.
yes,
That's
yes,
terrible. But I guess for me, what I'm coming from a different perspective, which is I was deeply socialized to attend to the emotional needs of the people around me.
hmm
And the expectation when I was coming up, working in the generation that we are in,
okay,
is that I was supposed to respond to the non-ask, right?
yeah,
That I was supposed to respond to that. And, as I've gotten older, I've realized like that's very counterproductive. And I think it's
uh-huh.
counterproductive in a couple of ways. Like one is it allows people to avoid the responsibility of actually asking for something, right? So
Correct.
asking for, I need help with this. Will you do this assignment for me? It
hmm
it is by naming it, there's an accountability, right?
hmm
Whereas because a lot of times, and I've seen this many, many times, and it's almost always a woman who is volunteering to
I was going to
overfunction.
ask if there was a gender component to it, if
Totally.
you
I
thought
mean,
there was
not
a gender.
not
Yeah.
always, but mostly it is a
Yeah.
woman who will volunteer to
hmm
overfunction and do something for someone else, sometimes
hmm
without even being asked, but sometimes with this kind of semaphore, I'm signaling that I would rather have you do this thing. They'll jump in, and then a couple of things happen. They don't get credit for it,
hmm
right? And they end up getting resentful, or they take on additional job duties so they're not able to do the things that they were supposed to do, right? One of
hmm
my bosses once said, "Don't ever do anything you're not asked to do because you're not going to get credit for it."
Yeah. Wow.
And I
Yeah.
don't know that I 100% agree with that, but I do think that it is, and if you are a woman who's listening to this, think about how you grew up and if
Mhm.
you grew up around people who didn't use their words, right? And again, it's social. Like I was noticing my grandson, who is all of 4 years old, will sometimes walk in and be like, "I'm hungry." And I will say to him, "What would you like me to do about that?"
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Not because, I mean, he's 4, but also
Yeah.
to just be like, "I'm gonna start right now with the assumption of like, I am interested in your statement of what is
Yeah.
happening. How can I help you with that?" And
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
will
Yeah.
think about it and then he'll be like, "Can I have, a banana? Can I have some yogurt?" Like whatever,
Mm,
which is good because I'm also
yeah.
inviting him to be like,
Yeah.
"I
To
am
participate in the.
interested
Yeah.
in your agency and what you would like to consume right now."
I remember when I was at Code Magazine, and the woman who put it together was somebody from Condé Nast, and she walked into my office and said, "I need you to find a writer for the debut issue cover story with Samuel Jackson. Can you think of anybody?" And I go, "Let me think about it." She gives me a weird look and leaves my office. And I'm like, "What?" And I'm forced into some momentary reflection. I go, You know I'm a writer. You know I'm editor in chief. Why would you ask me to do it? Why? What just happened? And then I got irked enough where I stood up and I pulled a Dick Cheney, which not to say I shot her while hunting, but I walked into her office and said, "I found the best person for the job, and that is me." And she goes, "I wondered why you didn't say anything." This was like terribly misleading. You asked me like you didn't want me to do it, you know. So you put me in a position where you want to see if I would fight for it. That's a stratagem that fails with me. I'm a fighter for fun, but not for that kind of stuff. But in that instance, it worked. I was the best person for the
Right.
job, actually. So,
Well, and
but
that's
yeah,
why
it's
then
language is very strange.
well, and it's also I try to and advise people to, be intentional about language. Make
Yeah,
sure you understand what is being asked. Make sure
yeah.
you are clear about what it is that you are willing to do, right? Like
Hmm.
these assumptions can often really derail projects and challenge, careers. If you make an
Correct.
assumption about what it is that you're doing, there's no reason you can't just quickly be like, okay, so let's just next steps. You're going to do this thing. You're going to do this thing. This is
Right.
what we're all doing, and it's going to be done by this date. So yes, the non-ask is a no-no and to be avoided at all times. All right.
Correct.
So our last question it was from someone who is a freelancer and they
Mm,
wanted us to talk about some of the challenges that can happen between freelancers and FTEs or full-time employees.
oh God.
And they were talking specifically, how do you navigate the tension between freelancers and full-time employees? And then
Mm.
the listener who wrote in talks about only working part-time but being expected to do a tremendous amount of work part-time because, well, you can use AI. But then she's
Uh,
left out of the loop on meetings, reviews, and other information. So she can't work as effectively. And she said
uh,
that a lot of the challenges she's working with an international team. And so people are working at very different time zones. And
mhm.
so sometimes she's left out of meetings because it's the middle of the night, her time. But she talks about like kind of what do you do in those circumstances? Do you have any thoughts for her?
Yeah, this is a sleazy, terrible, sleazy company that you're working for because, after a certain point, there's a friend of mine, Sarah Horowitz, and she's the one who won the MacArthur Genius Grant for starting the Freelancers Union. You should go to their site and give it a read through. There's some interesting stuff there about how to apply yourself as a freelancer amongst full-time employees. But this is garbage. What they're hoping to do is that your level of self-abnegation will rise so high that you'll say, I'll take all the meetings, I'll do this because you're worried about your freelance bucks and do all this non-remunerated stuff to make them happy. I mean, you are like a substitute teacher, you're a bit player, and usually the people who are in your position are there for really good reasons. Like they, you, those are their plan Bs. Their plan A is something else that they're doing with their time that they really want to do. And if after a year they haven't made you part of the team, you're being jobbed, you're
Right.
exploited is what I'm saying. So and the full time employees know that you're like Cinderella. They will abuse you if given the opportunity, and it's not necessarily malice either. If the company is understaffed and these people are pressed and they're shoved up against the wall, well, that's what you're there for. But it's not like one person once said uh, about fighting. They said it's not a long term career goal.
Right.
So you got to get out. You got to get out.
Right. And I want to name too that this is really bad boss behavior. So this is an inexcusable setup. There are many, many tools. They're not even that expensive that organizations use to manage asynchronous workflows. There are plenty of international teams. I work with some of them. And
Yes.
there are many systems where you can do everything from recording little short videos to, like working on documents together to project management updates. Like these exist and they have existed for years and years. So if there is not a system in place to
Mhm.
facilitate coordination between teams in different time zones, and then whether they're full time or freelance or whatever, that's a huge problem, right? And I
Yep.
understand. I mean, again, I work for myself, and I understand that somebody offers you a job and you feel like you have to take it if things are slow. But I always try to do some due diligence, because what happens is that these jobs suck your soul, and they also take away from your ability to pick up the next job, which could come in 2 days, 2 weeks, or 2 months. And if you're busy because you're stuck with this horrible one, and figure out what your kind of yardstick is, right? So for me, I look at, do I think these people are going to pay me? Are they paying me a reasonable rate? And I will ask, like, how do you coordinate? What are the expectations, right? Like if they're, and I don't, and again, there have been jobs that I have taken where I am working with an international team, and I know that at least once a month, I'm going to be getting up really early or staying up really late, having a call with India, because that's how it's going to work. Right. And I can fit in Australia in the afternoons, and, but I know that going into it, and I'm signing up for it. And I think too, with the understanding of, like you mentioned, the reader mentions that there's an expectation of her productivity that's connected to her use of AI. And to me, that's one of those things where it's like, yes, of course, if an organization has guardrails around how we use AI and how we use, if there's workflows or templates, absolutely use those things. But if they're assuming that her workflow is her own internal AI process, then that's something that also needs to be clarified, right? Because if they're expecting that you can turn around something in 15 minutes with a good prompt, then why are they not just doing the prompt?
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
And then there also comes a point where it's like, how I do my business is not any of your business. Right. Like if it takes me 15 minutes to write something and it's worth $5,000 to you, then you should pay me $5,000. It doesn't matter how it all comes together.
It's also, I like your due diligence part, because I was about to take a job. I feel comfortable talking about the company at this time, InfoWorld, which if you've seen, it was a newsprint, large format newsprint computer journal from the Valley. And Michael, who was the executive editor, I don't even remember his last name at this point, he said, look, why don't you come into the office and I'll give you a tour. And I wasn't going to do it because I didn't really believe in due diligence. They pay, I'll take the money, I get paid. What do I care? But I went through the office and I was so glad that I did, because I felt like I was walking through San Quentin. None of the people there seemed happy. They all seemed pressed to the wall, the grindstone or whatever analogy works for you. And I declined the job offer specifically because the waves of unhappiness that just washed over me. And since then, I've been religious about doing due diligence. And that's what Glassdoor has been really solid. Yeah.
Well, and the last thing is, you teach people how to treat you.
Yeah.
And so walk into any new gig and be really clear about, that's going to need to be in the folder an hour before, like this is my timeline. This is how I communicate. This is what I need. And the like, oh my gosh, the emergency is happening. I need you to be on a call at midnight your time. I'm not available. Right?
Somebody I know famously did that with convicted felon Carlos Watson. They've been hired by him to do something incredible. And you said, no professional will say, yes, they can do this. And I'm a professional and I won't say yes to this. And of course, this was Stephanie with convicted felon Carlos Watson. And I think the chairwoman of the board called you, and your line, which I loved and have used in other circumstances, was, look, all I told him was no. That was the period, close quote, perfect. So, but
I think, no is a complete sentence, but also recognize that I no longer worked for Watson soon after that, which I do. I mean, that was a mutual choice. Like, I wasn't going to continue to participate in this, but there is a cost, right? And I also want to name the fact that some freelancers take jobs that are terrible because they need the money or they need the experience, or they're getting something else out of it. And so I don't want to in any way shame someone who isn't in a position to set those boundaries, but you'd be surprised, right? And setting the boundaries, being clear about how you're going to work, how much time you have, what extra work you're going to do. Because one of the things, one of my biggest frustrations is I hate to see people whose boundaries are trampled by the bad bosses they work for. Right. Yeah. Even just watching a TV show about it. Like, I have a friend who is in that situation right now. And every time she calls me, I'm just like, and again, like, she has reasons and I understand that and I want to be a supportive friend. But inside, I'm like, leave your job at the end of the day. It's like you
tell her that story about the guy with the brick in the warehouse. That might make her happy. That might make her happy.
I'm going to be the guy with the brick in the warehouse. I'm going to be the one like, I'm going to get you. All right. That's all we have time for. Thank you very much to everybody who sent in questions, comments, ideas. Keep doing it. WTF@badbossbrief.com. I read everyone and respond unless you're, selling us something. And until then, we'll see you in a couple weeks. Bye.
Adios.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of the Bad Boss Brief with Eugene S. Robinson and Stephanie Payrollo. You can find Stephanie on Substack at spayrollo.substack.com. And you can find Eugene on Substack at eugenesrobinson.substack.com, as well as over on Instagram at Mr. Sleep 3. That's the number 3. If you've got a workplace question, situation, or story you'd like us to discuss, send it to me, Stephanie, at WTF@badbossbrief.com. Be sure to join us every other Wednesday at badbossbrief.substack.com for new episodes. Until next time, don't be an asshole at work. Thanks for listening.